Hey guys, welcome to the Unscripted Success podcast, where I invite amazing guests that have taken the road less traveled and found success in their own way. And together we field questions submitted by you, the community, on topics related to career and business. Today we have Josh Maramba. Josh is the founder and CEO of Maramba Consulting, where he and his team work with innovative CEOs and passionate sales leaders across the country, helping them attract top talent, streamline their sales structure, and implement technology to accelerate their sales team's performance. Josh, how are we doing?
Oh, we're doing fantastic, Braxton. How
Good,
about
man.
yourself?
Life is good, thank you. Yeah, it's really good. You and I connected over LinkedIn. I don't know how long ago it
A
was,
while back.
but yeah, it's been a year or two at least. So,
Yeah.
before I kick it off and start inundating you with questions, do you have anything that you'd like to share with the community at all?
No, I think we should just get right into it. I'm
Okay,
excited.
cool, man. All right, cool. So we typically do 5 questions. So here is the first one. So this was submitted. They didn't leave any information, but they said, we all face unique hurdles, even if they're ones that we impose on ourselves. What is your advice that you feel prevents you from maximizing your productivity and success?
Oh, it's a great question. And so unique to the individual, right? But I'll speak to myself and my experience, right? Uh, so historically, and I feel like it takes everyone decent amount of time to get to know themselves, know thyself, and understand what these challenges and hurdles are. I'm the type of individual I spend a lot of time introspectively. So I feel like I've gotten a good grasp on that. I find I call them kind of ways that you sabotage yourself, but I find that for myself, it's often overthinking. I'm very analytical. I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't call myself a perfectionist or super organized, but I really like to process through how to get something right. And like how to actually execute at a high level, high quality, whether it's for myself, my clients, my family. And oftentimes I get stuck in the minutia of planning and strategy and instead of just executing and doing something.
Absolutely. I'm actually the same way. So I've tried in the last maybe year or two, I've tried to flip this on myself because I realized it was such a problem. But you kind of touched on it where you kind of get in your own head a little bit and get obsessed almost with the idea of perfection. That's my problem. So
Yep.
like when I first started my business, like my wife would tell you, like I would stay up to the wee hours of the night building a website for myself. And the types of things I would obsess over on the website is like, oh, this image is 5 pixels too much to the right. I got to figure out how to fix the code to fix it. And then multiply that by 100. And that was me. Like it was so
Braxton,
bad.
I have a web developer and this is just me being very open and transparent.
Yeah.
Like 3 weeks ago, we launched a new business about 8 weeks ago. And 3 weeks ago, I'm sitting there looking at the website and I can't even take the time to message him. And he is like amazing, gets back to me like that. And I just hopped in the back end because I was like, I built web pages. I know how to do WordPress. I'm good. And I totally like spent 4 hours over my week. I could have just
Right.
messaged him. So I
It's
dig that.
it's so killer. Like, and then so like I found myself, okay, I can't do that anymore. Or at least like what I've done, it's talking about web pages specifically, like I figured out like a way. I basically just keep a template of a web page where you just plug in elements of it. And often it's sales pages and stuff like that. So if you have a good converting sales page, there's a marginal chance that it'll convert even if you swap out the content and stuff. So that's the way for now, I've kind of been treating it. And that's helped and it's been awesome. But yeah, like also like I'm the same way. Like I have my background is in marketing and in the technical side of marketing specifically. And like I nerd out and I freaking love that stuff. And because I've been doing it as long as I have, like I'm pretty quick at it. But I have someone on my team that's worked with me for over a year now. And that's what I've hired them to do, is like to do all the client projects on that type of stuff. And it is like it's a challenge to really like look at yourself and be like, no, I don't want to send this over to Ursula because
Yep.
like and then you realize, no, you need to, because there's things that you could be doing that is better spent, time better spent. And so like that is like easily, anyone that knows me super well that has worked with me knows that is definitely my advice for sure.
I feel like that's not totally uncommon for a lot of entrepreneurs, but I would say even if I look back at when I was a career sales leader, I ran the same exact challenge where I would try to jump in and take on way too much, just me doing it work instead of delegating it or giving. I always think about it as giving someone an opportunity to perfect those skills, right, and to be able to develop. And I will say, like, cracking that code, quote unquote, but really having self-awareness of that completely changed me starting businesses, completely changed my career trajectory. I probably wouldn't have ever successfully started a business until I really started focusing on, like, okay, gotta like let this thing go, hand it off to somebody else.
Yeah, totally. Like, it's being able to delegate. Like I hear people talking about it. You listen to other podcasts, you hear people talk about it, but like, I still don't feel like sometimes that is something that we as business owners talk about enough. Because like, we're all the types, like most of us, we started our business doing the thing that the business does, right? And so it's a real big challenge. And like, so there's a book called Crossing the Chasm, right? And Jeffrey Moore wrote it, and he talks about jumping the S curve, meaning like, the things that got you to where you are not the things that help you really scale your business after that point. And being able to remove yourself and replace yourself in your business is one of the first things that has to happen in jumping that curve. And that is like the hardest thing, because we all love what we do, right?
Yeah, it's hard to let go. It's interesting because the individual who sent that question in, obviously we didn't have a ton of context there, but a more broader response too is, as I was thinking about our answers, obviously both of us have very similar tendencies, it sounds like. But I'll say, even before I was aware of that being a hurdle or something that was getting in the way of my success, I think a really important part is going to people around you who you work with and identify, whether it's friends, family, like depending on your community network, and validate, like, is that truly an obstacle barrier? Because I can say, before I was self-aware of what we were just discussing, like basically not handing things off, I thought I had all sorts of like barriers or things that were getting in my way or sabotaging me. Weren't. Like, they weren't. I was way off. Like, I was way off target. And if you're not really clear on what your hurdles are and validate that those indeed are the biggest hurdles, you're gonna spend a ton of time trying to address something or stressing about something that's not. No, it's not what needs attention.
Yeah, I love it. That's an interesting thought, because like, as entrepreneurs, I think self-awareness, like that, you won't get far unless you have that. So it's really interesting to hear you say, like, there's a bunch of things that I thought that was my vice, my problem, or my challenge, and they ended up not being it, based on what everyone else around me was saying. That's like, that's got to be like a huge, almost come to Jesus moment. And when it comes to being a business owner, that's crazy to think. Maybe I haven't done that. Maybe I should do that. I'd be curious what people would say about me. Cool, man. All right. Question number 2. That they lead by saying, do I give up or do I push through? And it says, I started a business about a year ago. I've had some accomplishments, like getting the product into a major retail store. However, it has cost me more than I've profited so far, and I'm starting to wonder if I should have started it at all.
Oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I've definitely, I feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. They continue by saying, my drive to keep promoting it and marketing it is dwindling. And let's see, sorry. I know that a year isn't probably long enough. I don't know whether to keep putting time, energy, and money into it, or if I should let it go. Is it too soon to tell? And then, have you guys quit a business you started? How did you know when to quit?
That's such I think it's such a powerful question. And I'm telling you right now, I would have answered this so differently even 5 years ago, just based off of life experience, right? So I've worked with several entrepreneurs over the past 10 years to help them develop, launch, scale product businesses. It sounds like, work to get them into national retailers. We worked with Safeway, negotiated with Target, Nordstrom's, like, you name it, right? And that was an interesting journey, because a lot of the entrepreneurs early on that I worked with, we faced those same exact challenges, where all of a sudden, and now it's like cautionary tales that I tell a lot of my clients now. It's like, oh my gosh, when we were building this business and scaling it, we didn't prepare for taking a hit on margins. For example, when you're selling to national retailers, if you don't understand the business economics at that scale, you don't plan for it, and you think you're getting away with, you're like, man, we're like undercutting the competition and we're trash talking everyone, charging way more than they should. And then suddenly you get to the big, the playoffs, and you're like, oh, yeah, like, this is not what I thought it was. And then obviously combating market trends and negotiating with those guys is tough as it is, even despite the economics at that scale. So I'll tell you again, 10 years ago, even I would have just been like, push through, you can do it, da 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 da. And it's not that I still don't lean that direction. You have a dream, you have a passion. I don't think necessarily giving up and like completely giving up is always the route to go. I think a lot of times you can reinvent, you can pivot, you can take what you've developed and navigate it. So in that example, the example that comes to mind, I helped the organization scale nationally. They were in all the big box retailers, and same thing. They got squeezed on margins. We worked with them on pricing strategy to help them navigate some of that. But honestly, they weren't set up for success at scale. They didn't have the financial backing that they should have had before they made that big jump. And so we essentially worked with them, and I'm shortcutting a lot, but identified we need to navigate moving into different channels to be able to offset this. And so they slowly started pulling out of some of the national big box to move into e-commerce. And then now knowing what they needed to know, they can move back into the big box once they're ready and prepared, right? And so it was a pivot in their case. They didn't shut down. But there are other situations that I do want to point out. Here's what's changed. There are situations that I've worked with product companies where my advice to them, just looking at the economics and how they were positioned in market trends, I was like, this is probably a good time to wind this down before you spend the next 5 years investing, losing money, but not give up. See, that I still don't consider it give up, because take that, maybe look to sell, the IP or whatever you have, but then move into something. Take everything you learned. You're an entrepreneur. You were a business owner. Take everything you learned and launch the next thing. And the last thing I'll say is I have absolutely had to close up shop more than once. And I think almost every single successful entrepreneur, I work with a lot of really successful entrepreneurs who have amazing businesses, who've gotten acquired and all that. Every single one of them, minus maybe one or two, have started mini businesses before that and had to close up shop. And it's a heartbreaking experience, but I will tell you, the things that you learn closing up shop and having to wind things down, you will take into the next business, and it'll make you that much more effective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. That's such a good insight. And your experience sharing that with that particular company. I think that's really that's a little golden nugget that I hope people think about, because we all start whatever we're doing with this grand vision of what it's going to be and stuff. Right. And it, to your point, it never ends up being what we see it being. And there's so much I can unpack about this, just what I've experienced. But one of the things I'll point out is the way I took an interest in business. I never thought I would be a business owner ever. And that's just because I was young and naive mostly. But reading a lot of Seth Godin's books is what initially got me to take an interest into entrepreneurship. And he has a book called The Dip, and that's what it covers this whole topic. When do you quit, when you don't? And some people don't realize, they don't really I noticed this in both so I have two businesses. I noticed this both in my software consulting company and then my career coaching company. A lot of professionals, business owners or otherwise, struggle to look at the grand vision and almost reverse engineer the milestones it takes to get there. And very often, that's why I shouldn't say very often, but I think that's why a lot of businesses end up failing, because you're not going to go 0 to 60 and end up on a morning primetime television or whatever, talking about your business, right? It doesn't work like that. A lot of people struggle with that. Yeah. And then I in thinking about this, I remember the first time I really tried to start a business, that was my exact problem too. I had no vision. I just knew there was this thing I wanted to do, but I didn't take the time to figure out my buyer persona, or what the offer really was, or what even just the basics of that stuff. And it really just failed before it even started. And at that point, I'm married, I have 2 children, and we're sleeping on the floor of my mother-in-law's spare room and stuff. I'm trying to figure this out. And I just finally had to say, you know what? I can't do this in my family anymore. And so we got to shift gears and do something else. And so for another 5 years after that, I don't think I didn't even have a full-time business at that point. Yeah. And to your point, you got to pay your dues almost, right? You got to go through the crap to really learn from it. And this reminds me of a statistic that I've looked up. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Josh, but statistically, professionals, and I think it mentions, I can't remember if it's specifically business owners or not, but most people don't hit what they would consider their big break until their 40s. You know what I mean? And I think that's because, if we start a business and we have this grand vision of something, even in our 20s, it's going to take that long to fumble around and fall on our face enough times to learn, like you were saying, and then be able to take that learning and realize, oh, this is actually what it takes. And I wasn't, stepping up, and I wasn't meeting what was necessary.
Yeah, that's right. And another thing that occurred to me as we're talking is it depends on what stage your business is at, right? So, and I've seen this a lot of different ways, but there's kind of like the false start, for lack of better terms, where you're starting a business, but it hasn't really reached this, you don't have a bunch of employees. There's not like a ton of customers that you would have to sunset your product or service. And then there are businesses that have reached that point. You have to make that's where they're asking the question again. I don't know where this individual's at, but I would say there is a difference in my answer. I guess I would say, if it's relatively early, again, it's, you're strapping and it's really you, maybe you've got a couple of people who are, underpaid. That's still hard, but it's a different challenge. And I would say oftentimes in a situation like that, it's a good sign. To your point, it's like, probably didn't put all the pieces together, and maybe I should take a step back. Maybe even I've talked to some people where I'm like, maybe you should go work a full-time job for a while and just be brief and understand, like, where did I go wrong? What do I need to do? But once your business has grown to a specific point, so for example, my consulting business, I'll use that as an example. I reached a point, it was early last year, where I realized, the business is great, it's healthy, we're doing great work, but it has limitations on scalability. And there's several factors that I'm like, man, I'm not happy with where this is going to be 10 years from now if I'm limited, right? And big thing for me is impact. And so I'm limited on impact. And that was actually, I had this kind of conversation, like, do I wind it down, start something new? Like, that seems silly. Like, it's not, it's not bad. But that was actually what motivated me to launch a new business. So I feel like, again, just depending on where you're at, if you reach a point where you're like, this isn't, whether it's not working or not working the way you envisioned it, which I think is very common for a lot of entrepreneurs to hit one of those points, I think that you have to take a step back and truly just take the time and have that internal dialogue. Like, should I shut it down, launch a new thing, but just war game all the different paths?
Yeah. Yeah. That like, it's so underrated. And I think, like, I don't know if it's a human condition that we are so quick to stop talking about the basics.
Yeah.
And people assume that the basics and everyone knows them, I guess. And that's why we don't do it. But like, it's so incredibly important. I was actually just on a coaching call with a client earlier this week, and so they have an agency of some sort, and because of their connections, they've worked with basically like the list of celebrities that they've collaborated with. Like, I was like shocked how many, and they came to me and they're like, yeah, I've worked with all these people, but like, this business I'm not even doing what I want to be doing. And I was like, well, what do you want to be doing all day in this business? Well, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, so like, yeah, let's take it 2 steps back. Your accolades and this recognition that you have for, I mean, they were mentioning people like Brooke Shields and Hugh Jackman and Courtney Cox. Like, these are the people they've collaborated with in their agency. And but those basics, not setting up the basics, not setting up that foundation, kind of put them in a position where they're kind of just going with the wind and just flowing whichever way the wind flows. And one of the questions I even asked them was like, well, what is your offer? And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, if you don't have like a concrete buyer persona and a concrete offer, then like, no wonder you're feeling burned out in your business, and it's not going a certain direction, because you're just having people coming to you because of your connections and because of your network, but you're having to chase however it is that they want you to do it, because you don't have that foundation of, this is who we are, what we do, and why we do it, type of thing. And like, I would like to think that it was a huge light bulb moment for them. And I think they got value from that. But like my whole point in this is just to say, like, we can't, just because the basics are the basics doesn't mean that they're not super important, super foundational in what we're doing.
Yeah, and that's such a solid point, because I think, again, the individuals, they were asking, like, do I push through? Do I give up? I think there's a more important underlining question is, how did I get here? Right? What sort of foundational steps? Either way, by the way, if you push through or you give up, you still have to answer that question, because if you quote unquote give up, if you're an entrepreneur, that just means you're going to launch something else. You're going to do something else. It might take you some time to get back on your feet, but trust me, I've seen it hundreds of times. Like, you will inevitably, you want to learn what went wrong. What do I need to do better this time around? I'll tell you right now, the business that we launched about 8 weeks ago, it took me probably, I don't even know if I could put a percentage of time, but it was like 10% of the time to get all the back end stuff launched and prepared than the team, a consulting firm, just because I knew all the mistakes that I had made previously. I knew the things that, like, oh my gosh, eventually I'm going to have to transition to a corporation, an S corp or whatever. What do I have to do today to make that way less painful than I did last time?
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that sometimes, like, this is going back to our vices. Like, this is what I'm so guilty of is I used to, like, talking about the website from earlier, like, I used to obsess and getting over everything perfect, but like, I didn't take the time to just plan out the basics like we're talking about at first. And so of course it's going to fail because you're focusing on the wrong things. You're focusing on things that don't really matter. And again, I'm bringing up Seth Godin because he's my hero, but like, he talks about, well, what is the hard part? You getting your website right where the image is 5 more pixels to the left. That's not the hard part, man. Like, so either if you're not capable of doing it, you can pay someone $50 to go move that image 50 pixels or whatever it is. Like, and so, like, I think that's the thing a lot of us don't stop and do either, is when we do make mistakes, we don't stop and take inventory of what are we going to learn from this either. Yeah. And so either we continue to make the mistakes or we continue to fumble anyway because we're not recognizing the lesson that needs to be learned there.
Good.
Yeah, man. Cool. All right. Question 3. I'm curious to hear what the biggest reality check or the biggest truth you've discovered about starting your own company.
Ooh, the biggest. Ask me each week and you'll get a slightly, I'm sure, nuanced answer to that question. I'm learning something new constantly. I think for me, one of the reality checks that just stands out, and the reason I'll say that this stands out is I actually do talk to probably, I don't know, anywhere between 3 to 6 aspiring entrepreneurs a week who just hit me up on LinkedIn and try to find some time on my calendar. And one of they asked me all sorts of questions about starting a business. And I'm like, all right, well, here are my thoughts. But one of the common themes that comes up consistently is I think the expectation of why you're doing it. I think that's a big thing for even me. I don't know that I gave this enough thought, why you're doing it. And there are a variety of different reasons that everyone, when you get asked, like, why'd you start your business? It's like, again, there's going to be personal reasons. Like, I wanted to make good money. I wanted freedom, flexibility. I wanted to change the world, whatever, right? There's a lot of reasons. And usually you just give the one that you know that the audience wants to hear, which is respectable because you're not going to take an hour of their time. That being said, I think that a lot of people go into entrepreneurship or running a business, starting a business, acquiring a business, whatever, with this idea that they're going to have to work hard. They understand that, but I'm going to have freedom, flexibility, like this. They oftentimes have this vision of what they're going to get, right? And I think that is an important lesson that I've learned, right? I'm no different. I think I went into it with some expectations instead of realizing that, starting a business, being an entrepreneur, you're going to work harder, not just more hours. You're going to work harder and rack your brain and stress over things you just couldn't imagine until you jumped into it and have been doing it for many, many years, not the first couple of years. And then you're also going to likely pay yourself a lot less than you think because you're going to, even when you get to the point where you could pay yourself more, there are a whole lot of additional dynamics that you probably didn't take into account, whether it's as simple as the foundational stuff like taxes and things like that you didn't consider, or more complex things like, wow, I have a whole team of employees and people I want to put first. I want to take care of them first. You're not considering those things early on, right? Or maybe it's concept and it's not reality where you're like talking to these people and building relationships. So I think that's one of the big aha moments is really, go into it not, those can't be the reasons that you're jumping into it, right? Your reasons have to be much more long game, much broader. What do you want 20 years from now out of this? What's going to keep, if none of those things come to fruition, what's going to keep you going and excited about it? Do you love, to the point of the client you talked about, do you love the work? Like, that's another thing. You're going to have to do things that you don't love as an entrepreneur. And I get that, but do you love the core of what you do? And if the answer is no, and that to me is a red flag right off the bat. Right. So anyways, I would say that the why behind why you're doing it that's the big aha moment, is how important that is, and how much I guess how often people have a lack of clarity on that subject.
Yeah. You touched exactly on what like my knee jerk reaction to this question is too. Like, and I love your mention of like what is the why. One of the most impactful things that I've experienced recently, it was sometime this year. Simon Sinek gave a talk, and he has his book Start with Why or whatever, right? But he gave this talk and he explained that like the talk was about like what is your defining motivational statement for your business, whatever. And what he said his is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And since I've started even telling myself that in my own business, things have drastically changed with what I've been doing. And it's really incredible. And that's not even my own personal motivational like statement for my business. That's his. I just borrowed it for myself and it started working. But yeah, like understanding what your why is. And if your why is I just need to feed my family, that's great and that's noble. And I'm not dogging that. But going back to what Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. If that's your why, then that's not going to translate. That's not going to resonate with them. And so you really need to figure out what is your why that resonates with the people that you're providing value to. Because until you figure that out, the people you're providing value to aren't going to see it as valuable. And yeah, so like, and then also like, I think the other thing that took me a lot to realize like was my big like light bulb. Oh, this is like, my reality check is I don't think most business owners realize like the sheer volume of X, Y, and Z that is going to be required of you to make this thing work. So sheer volume of funds, sheer volume of leads to like, in digital marketing this day and age where you're lucky to get a 3% conversion rate, like the sheer volume of leads you need to make that sustainable for a business, like that's a lot. And so I think a lot of people need to realize it's really important. And that's something that I'm noticing in my business is like, I do a lot of social media marketing. I love short form video is my main like content strategy. And I get a lot of leads from it, surprisingly, which I wasn't expecting, but it's in some ways, sometimes it's still not enough because of that. And so you mentioned earlier, Josh, talking about like going multi-channel and having multiple opportunities to bring business in from different directions. Like that is huge. So either, you need to go broad or you need to go deep, right? And so, and it can depend on the business, which might be a better approach. But yeah, just the sheer volume of your effort and your lack of sleep and your funding and your understanding from your spouse and funds and all that kind of stuff, that's been my biggest, like, holy crap, like this is not easy. Even though some people make it look easy, it is not easy.
You touch on something, and I don't want to change my answer, but I'll say here's one very important aha moment that I had, and I wish I would have had it earlier, but it's the importance. You touched on like the leads, right? But it's just the importance of having a great demand gen and having demand gen really, really understood and figured out. It's easy to ignore early on. It just is for a lot of businesses, right? Because a lot of businesses, they don't really need that much demand early on. Right? You only need to fulfill this amount. But you need to math out how you're going to fulfill demand at scale. Like there's this, the whole concept behind like the 10x rule. Dan Sullivan just came out with a book, 10x is easier than 2x. I just read it and I loved it because it just reminded me of so many principles that helped me avoid some of the mistakes I've made in the past more recently, which is, when you're setting yourself up for how many leads do I need? What kind of demand do I need? You're often setting yourself up so short term, right? And so I've been walking my clients, because the book came out, it's been fresh in my mind. I've been walking a lot of my clients through this concept where it's like, okay, whatever your goals are, let's 10x those and work through that math, and then we'll come back, because likely it's going to inform your decisions and your choices. And I think that it's a simple exercise. It's not simple to go through. It's simple to set up, but when you go through it, it opens your eyes up to all these things like, wow, how are we going to fulfill? Like, I have no plan for how we're going to get demand at size or scale, right? So I would say if I could turn back the clock, I would have spent a lot more time. I mean, branding and marketing, I'd spent a lot of time on that, but demand gen, how are you going to generate leads, interest? What are the channels that you're going to use? When one fails, what's your secondary channel? What are you going to switch to? What do you at least have a sense is going to work up to a certain point, and you're going to have to jump into whether it's cold calling, whatever it is. All those questions are things that I know, and I'm sure you know, a lot of business owners are not having until they're there. And by then, honestly, you've already basically like that year is in the books. Like you're not going to figure that out in 3 months.
Yeah, for sure. So if you don't mind me going off script a little bit, Josh, I think this question's popping in my mind for you. So I would imagine some of our listeners might be asking themselves the same question. And I know this very much depends on depends on the business. But what is your favorite strategy or favorite kind of channel to go through for demand gen?
What was the last half of that?
So I'm just wondering, like, what's your favorite lead gen channel, I guess.
Oh my gosh, that is, and you're so right. It depends on so many factors. So it's pivoting with the market changing, and I'll tell you that right now, because again, I would have given you a different answer last year and the year before. I'm a huge fan of, I don't know, this is like cheating to answer this way, but multi-channel approach simultaneously. And so I'll give you an example. For the new business that we're launching, we're using a combination of email, LinkedIn outreach, and I would call it cold calling, but it's not really cold because they have to opt in, but and phone calls, right? We're using kind of this dynamic approach to be able to get it up and running quickly. And I don't even though we're using multiple channels, like I've done the whole LinkedIn outreach automation, and we've gotten results with that. I've done the email. Email's great, but you have to stay on top of it. I'm sure, as you know, it's changing constantly. It does not work the same way it worked even a year ago, for sure, not 5 years ago. And so, in my opinion, the best method and the best approach is to have multiple channels that you are working simultaneously that complement each other, right? So, again, as an example, we're contacting people via LinkedIn and email. And then those who respond, who show interest, we're following up with a phone call immediately to be able to generate opportunities. As far as like, where do we gain these leads? And this is I'm talking grassroots for sure. Like, sure, like when you're launching something new, for the leads that we're generating, there's so many tools out there and platforms that will help you identify people who fit I won't go into it, but it goes way back. You got to be clear. You're going to reach out to people. Please be clear on what you like, who needs it. Don't hit me up and be like, I'm selling staplers, and
right.
It's like, I don't need it. I live in a digital world. Back off. Like, be clear. But if you are clear, it's a fantastic way to get connected with people even before they're out there looking for you. That being said, for more, for my consulting firm, for example, or more mature businesses, referrals and partnerships are, in my opinion, the best channels. So like for our consulting firm, we actually don't do any outbound at all. We get plenty of business inbound through our referral partnerships and networks with strategic people who we've developed relationships. So we get warm intros, or through partnerships, we're HubSpot partners. And so HubSpot sends us business through their directory. And so those to me are like the best lead sources once you get to the point where you've established authority and reputation that you could possibly get. So
love it. And just to kind of plug you a little bit, that's what you teach other people to do, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, a little bit of that we do. It's a lot broader than that, but that is a big part of it, is how do you set yourself up? And I'll clarify that too. So demand gen is one piece of it, the puzzle. But once you have demand gen, honestly, where we see people drop the ball, especially our clients who reach out to us, is once they have leads coming in, they're usually not closing them. They're not maximizing them, or not as well as they should, right? And so that's I would say the biggest leverage point that we bring is, how do you take, maybe you think you don't have enough leads, chances are you probably have, you're in business, you probably have a sustainable amount of leads. How do you take the leads that you have and increase the value in those?
Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to kind of go off script a minute to give you that opportunity to share that, because I think, again, people don't realize the level of effort and the level of, I guess, for lack of a better term, infrastructure is needed to find that level of success, right? I'm a former employee of Infusionsoft, which is now Keep. And like, after working with, I don't know how many hundreds of businesses, helping them get onboarded to put in these types of systems in place in their business, like that was always the glaring thing that I noticed as an onboarding specialist for them, was people have a ton of leads that they're getting, and they just seem to think that, and by people I mean business owners get all these leads in and think that they need more because they're not converting. But no, the goal is really in the list that you've built and the people that you've acquired up to that point, and you're probably just not converting them well. And a good sign that you're not doing it is if you don't know what that conversion number is for yourself once you get the lead, right? So like,
Braxton,
which a lot of people don't know,
bad.
Right?
These are just bad leads. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's take a deeper look.
Yeah, man. Cool. All right. Question number 4. I would like to know what book or video or course, if any, was the thing that really lit a fire under you and gave you that first push into launching a business?
Oh, man, so many. So plug real quick. If you want to know my top recommended reading book for business owners and sales leaders, I have it pinned on my LinkedIn profile because it is the most common question that I've had over the breadth of my career. So there's a couple. I can't say there's one specifically because I really don't know that I could put one above the rest. So for me, again, my background, I was a sales professional, sales leader, career sales leader for entrepreneurs, and then transitioned into being a business owner. And I got deep into Jeb Blunt's books. A lot of his books are really tailored towards sales and sales leadership, but he's an extraordinary businessman and owns a business. He owns Sales Gravy, and I've talked to their team, and they run a really great business. And if you think about, as you read through Fanatical Prospecting, for example, is one of my favorite books that he's put together, as well as EQ, Sales EQ. The principles in those books will help you as a business owner, because what do you have to do to be able to effectively grow a business? You have to sell, right? And I used to prescribe earlier, I think I should go back to this, but I used to prescribe to a lot of the smaller business owners. So they own businesses, if someone owns a business under like 10 million, I used to have their leadership teams read some of these sales inclined books so that they could understand what it is that they need to do if they're involved in the sales process. A lot of them had been removed at that point, or what their sales leaders or sales team need to understand. And that was such an eye-opening moment for them to be able to have the context there. The other one I'd say is Sales Management Simplified is another fantastic book because, again, it talks about practically about how to develop and build out structure around your sales organization, which, again, early on in a business, that's really it. It's get sales and marketing right. That's going to inform your product development or whatever you're developing in the back end. It's going to be informed by your customers anyways. And so I would say those books were definitely the ones that informed my business acumen most early on in that stage. One more, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes that one had a lot to do because he was speaking as a business owner and a sales professional. That had a lot to do with how I organized myself and structured. I had a lot of insight into how do you prioritize. Some simple stuff. How do you prioritize when you're running a business and also running sales within your business, which again is common. And that was a powerful book for me as well.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, for me, so a little bit of backstory about me. When I started my first side hustle, with the intention to make it like a full-time gig, which it didn't end up being, but my first side hustle I started, there was this period where, again, I said kind of when we started the show up, like I had no intention of ever starting a business, but then as I got older, I realized like, me being able to create something was appealing to me and something that provided value, not just for my family, but for others. And so I started my first side hustle, and the act of being the solopreneur in that side hustle over the course of, I don't know, a year or two, made me realize that I enjoyed marketing the side hustle more than I did actually doing the thing in the side hustle. And so that's when I realized it finally dawned on me. I'm in my early to mid 20s, I think. And I'm like, holy crap, what my thing, that my career choice, it's marketing. And so from that point, like I still was trying to market the side hustle, but I started buying, and I mentioned him once already, but Seth Godin I think he's a great resource for someone that is maybe a noob in entrepreneurship. And so I love a lot of his books. And frankly, I refer back to them still, either in audiobook form or just reading the actual book. I refer back to them still just to have that reminder about going back to the basics and making sure your basics are solid, like we were talking about earlier. But specifically, the first book I ever picked up of his was The Purple Cow. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, Josh. Yeah, I freaking love that book. Like it's so what I love about it is that so if for those listening that don't know what The Purple Cow is about, Seth Godin opens the book up and tells a story about he used to drive through the countryside in upstate New York or something like that when he would go on trips with his family as a kid. And being from the city, for a while, they would see cows in the countryside and, grazing on a farm or whatever. And for a moment, being a kid from the city, seeing cows was really cool. But after you drive for 2 hours and you see one cow after another, it's not interesting anymore because you've seen 100 other cows before that. And so then he says, well, if there was a purple cow in the middle of all of the regular cows out in the field, that would be interesting again. And so the whole concept of the book is building your marketing into your product. And so to give a good example, an example he uses in the book is one of the biggest pain points of like painting a wall is dealing with the paint can when you got to pour it into the tray and you make a big mess. So this one company built a attachable spout with the paint can, and it's easier to pour without making a mess. And so there's your marketing. Like, it's something worth sharing. Go buy this paint can from this other company, not the big guys in the paint making industry, because the spout is much more easier to use. And they're a huge piece of the market share for that reason alone. So without going down that road too much, that's why I love that book, is because it's just a great way, I feel like, to help you as a business owner think outside the box. And what are you doing in your product, your service, whatever it is, that builds the marketing into the product? And so a really simple answer is like doing things like this, where we share our knowledge and our expertise in the form of a podcast or a blog post or social media and things like that. That's the easy way to build your marketing. And something I even do is, like, when I have coaching calls, I'm a blue check certified expert on the Intro app. And if we can talk about that maybe another time, but like, I record my calls on that app when people find me, and then that creates demand for other people to basically find me on Intro, which is really cool. So like, those are some simple examples. But anyway, so going back to the book, like that book, if anyone has not read that book, even if you've been in business for 10, 20, 30 years, I would recommend that book, because it is a great way to help you start thinking outside the box if you feel like you struggle with that. So
I think it's great to have I have a hit list of books that I reread. And in fact, I have the same hit list is what we work through as my team. So an organization, we have a book club, read books, discuss it once a month. And I think that, to your point, it might be, even if a business owner feels like they're beyond, quote, a certain point, these are important principles that, we oftentimes need to perfect, or that we've forgotten elements of. So I love the idea of, regardless of where you're at, picking up that book and revisiting that.
Cool, man. All right, last question. And this one's a little bit longer, so I'm just going to try and read through it all. But our business is doing well, but I'm finding that good help is hard to find. I'd really like to find a couple partners. I've reached out to the community. I've tried hiring through traditional job boards, everything I can think of. I've even been offering higher than market compensation and equity incentives. And even so, I have had a terrible time finding reliable help. The business is profitable and the plan has been validated. My only stumbling block right now has been that it seems to be troublesome getting a handful of hardworking, like-minded people on board to build momentum. How do you go about finding good partners?
Yeah, this is good. So we, part of our consulting offerings or services is to help implement a process for hiring talent. Specifically top talent. So we're talking VPs of sales, CROs, very difficult roles to find and to fill. They're going to be running significant sections of your business with the goal of them running it better, or at least as well as you could. And so, long story short, we invested a lot of time and money into building these systems out internally so that we could service our clients with a high level of value. And part of the idea is, whether they're using recruiters or not, or whether they're reaching out to their network, you need a process internally for being able to execute this as a high level. What I love about what we developed is, frankly, this is something that you don't have to be a big business hiring a CRO to use. It's the same principles, the same concept. I was meeting and having a great conversation with the sales leader, who's the sales leader of a recruiting firm in my city. And yesterday we were talking through a lot. It's very timely. We're talking through a lot of these challenges, hiring talent. Obviously, that's what his whole company does. Specifically, he's leading the sales arm, so he's got insight into some of the challenges that people are facing in this market specifically. And it was interesting to see the things that we both found to be true. Again, I don't run a true recruiting firm, so we're recruiting very like specific individual specific roles occasionally. But even though he's doing it at scale, they're seeing the same thing, that most of the challenge isn't through the channels that people are using. Most of the challenges that people are having when they're like, man, we're not able to find the right person, or there's a lot of churn for this role, is because they actually haven't clearly defined who they're looking for and what they need to do. And so even if I look at our internal process, and we spent tens of thousands of dollars on building this, we hired top experts who were involved in creating all the popular assessments, we pulled from Top Grade, you name it, right? And I will tell you my favorite part, and what I think the heart of our success, and we have over a 90% success rate with this hiring process for our clients, is the fact that we spend a lot of time on calibrating the who. Like, who are you trying to hire? And everyone has an idea and feels very strongly that they know who they need to hire. But they haven't really sat down. And I'll tell you a couple red flags immediately, right? And this is actually from the conversation I had with that leader of the recruiting company yesterday. One is that they have too many key responsibilities. And so one of the exercises I do before we even get into the process is I'll ask the hiring manager or the business owner, like, hey, what are the top 3 to 5 key responsibilities? And I want 3 to 5. That's it. 3 to 5 key responsibilities. What are the key performance indicators that you're using to track those? What are the specific goals? And sometimes they haven't really gone in depth. It can take, 3 to 4 weeks going through a process to get clear on exactly that. But I'll tell you, we've had success because when people interview with us, oftentimes we'll do a lot of the interviewing and screening early on for a new client to model it. People are like, yeah, I know exactly what to expect for this role. I have more clarity on this than others. We actually just had a company hire someone below half of market rate. They were exploring 2 other offers that were both going to pay them. Both of these roles, the roles are over 6 figures, right? Base, but one was twice as much, like literally twice as much. And they turned it down and went with my client. And when we asked them, what were some of the reasons, I'm always kind of trying to prompt some more information. Mm-hmm. A lot of it had to do with going through the process and having clarity on what was expected. Because even if you have a promise of making more money and having all these things, all the vague kind of like, what really am I going to get? That is fear inducing, right? And so if you can attract people and have clarity around exactly what's expected, what they're going to do, I mean, down to the detail. Like down to the detail, again, I'll spare going into all the process there. That has a significant impact and difference. And the one last comment I'll make is a lot of people don't market or advertise their roles effectively. You have to think about it as a marketer. I'm not saying like use a bunch of cutesy words, but again, great marketing is very clear, simple, easy to understand. I know what I'm looking at, and I know if I'm the target audience. I would say that is the most important element of successfully hiring talent, especially if you are a small business and you're hiring under market rate. It's even more important.
Yeah, I love it. There's 2 things that come to my mind. Like that is so, like, again, what you're really talking about is kind of going back to basics. Like the people you're trying to find, you have to do them the favor of letting them know what the expectations are. And I think so many business owners, not even entrepreneurs, but just to your point, hiring managers or people and even corporations, do not do that very well. And that's something that I run into a lot as a career coach, where I have recruiting partners and other companies that I'm partnered with, where we kind of share leads and things like that. So many companies will spend 10 minutes writing a job description and just leaving it at that. And they don't, like, literally, they just write it and they're done. And like, it's obvious which companies are doing that because they tend to have a little bit more turnover, right? And I think the same thing happens with partners and things like that. I worked at a tech company where there was a new VP going in and out every 6 months for a while. And I think this is part of the reason why. Yeah, one thing that I will point out too is you brought up like the notion of like, what are their 3 to 5 key responsibilities? There was a tech company I worked at for about 3 years, and that was something they did very well. We called it our big 3, and it was literally the 3 metrics that defined your job, basically your position. And those were the 3 things that you were evaluated on in terms of like performance reviews and things like that. And so even just being able to articulate and communicate that and put it into writing, I think helps a lot. And again, no one is doing that. And then lastly, my last comment about it, I'm actually a minor partner in a software consulting company aside from my own. And like, that was the first thing I asked them was, because again, and I don't fault them for this, but they didn't diligently go through this process of figuring out who they're looking for. And so like, that was the first thing I asked them was like, what is the 3 things that you're going to hold me to as the fractional CMO of this company? And they had to think about it for a minute. I'm like, okay, so then we almost co-created what the role and what the expectations were at that point, because I wanted to know clearly what's expected of me and what do we need to determine as the exit as a partner if this doesn't work out, if I don't meet your expectations or whatever it is. Like, it's so important to get all that lined up. So it's one thing to find the partner almost, but it's also another that is just as critical to figure out how do they exit the business for whatever reason too.
No, that's brilliant. That's a good call out. So the individual that we ended up recruiting, it was a really key hire for our client. Big impact. They're going to be essentially leading the efforts around revenue. And it was interesting because, to your point, one of the big things was it was actually a higher risk for them to join our client's company than the other companies that were looking. But the difference was they had clarity around risk. Very specific clarity. And I think that is one of the key takeaways is it's not about de-risking the role. It's about providing, especially at a partner level, there's inherent risk. The individuals that you want are going to be open and excited about the risk and the upside, but you need to give them really great clarity around what are those things. The other point that you had was that 3 to 5, right? Or in that example, the 3 key responsibilities. So as I've gone through the exercise with business owners who are looking for, again, whether it's a partner level or someone who's going to be running a significant part of their business, one of the things I've identified is it's a blocker for a lot of them, right? Where they're like, dude, there's like 10, 12 things, right? Or 7 or 8. And it's because they're thinking about how they operate, which, by the way, is a whole nother topic and probably a red flag right there. But I think a lot of times we need to take a step back and say, if you're looking for a unicorn, it's going to be as easy as finding a real unicorn. Right. And oftentimes when I ask them, I'm said, okay, so you've attempted to hire like this before. Most people have tried to fill this role. What's happened? Well, we either can't find anybody or we find someone and they're totally erect. Like, they did all this damage and they didn't work out. And like, they said that they could do this. I said, well, that's exactly what happens when you set the bar to the moon and you say, well, we want this person. Either you're going to get no response because people are going to be honest and be like, well, I can't do that. Or you're going to get someone who's like, I can do it, who's either completely ignorant of the fact that they can't, or they're lying, which means you just hired a con artist. And I think that right there has been a big eye opener for a lot of the business owners I've worked with, is just helping them understand like they are actually setting themselves up for failure in hiring by setting that bar too high instead of getting someone who's exceptional at those 3 to 5 things who can take their business to the next level. And if they need to, hiring another individual to focus on the other 12 things that they wanted this one person to do.
Yeah. You're touching on something that I've found in like throughout my career before starting my business. I think whether you're a partner or you're going to be an employee or a manager or whatever it is, I don't think this matters. And that is that people need to know and love to know where they stand with their XYZ, with their partner. And that's when I took inventory. Like, I started my business because I was just frustrated with the job market, quite frankly. And there were other reasons I started my business, obviously, but that was one of them. But like, I realized after starting my business, like, why did I not stick with these companies like most people would stick around for like longer? And I realized is like, I always ended up leaving ultimately. Like, when you really boiled it down, is I didn't know where I stood with my company, with the CEO, with whoever it was. And having that lack of clarity, to your point, Josh, having that lack of like when where you stand feels ambiguous or foggy, like no one likes being in that space. And so, but if the leader or the partner, whoever it is, doesn't give you the courtesy of like having regular, even just regular check-ins or conversations, or having some sort of like, I don't know what it is, like a weekly or monthly meetup or whatever it is with you to facilitate that, then things tend to go downhill, even if there's not any real issue. But just being in the dark about it is enough for you to because then that impacts other things, right? Impacts your performance and it impacts your ability to make an impact, really. Anyway, I've always found that to be, for me, to be the case. Like, you don't know where you stand, figure out a way to know where you stand.
That's well said. And actually, to your point, that I think is that's why it's important to be communicative during the interview and recruiting process, because that's the only hint that they have of what it's, if they're going to have, great communication and one-on-ones and check-ins. Once again, looking back at the work that we've done for our clients in the past, that feedback has always been, we have to kind of coach and get the executive team that we're working with oftentimes to be more communicative because they're busy. But it's like, hey, you got to show them, especially when you're down to your final candidates. If you're down to your final three, like, show them that you're going to be available and how you're going to be able to coach them and support them in that role. And that goes a long way. So
yeah, love it. Cool, man. Well, that's our 5 questions. Josh, thank you so much for sharing your insight. I don't doubt for a second that people listening have gotten a lot of value out of this. So thank you so much for joining me and me putting you on the spot with Cool, man. So just to kind of wrap it up, one final question that I always try to ask my guests, and I do this because I want them to have an opportunity to share whatever is important to them, basically. So I ask everyone this question, and the question is, what is one thing that I should have asked you where your answer would be something that the world needs to hear?
Oh yeah, this is so right now. I'm extreme. I've always been passionate about sales and marketing leaders as a profession. Obviously, I've worn that hat and work and coach through my engagements with companies. A lot of sales and marketing leaders, and it's tough, to say the least. It's a really tough gig, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the things that I've been passionate about more recently is how, I've had a lot of success both in my career, but then also outside of it. How did I have success, and how have other leaders that I've worked with had success? What's the difference maker between that individual and the other one who's working just as hard, but really struggling, working so much that they don't see their family, they're traveling all the time, it's just not worth the money, or maybe they're struggling to get market value, right? So for me, it comes down to impact and value. So I think the question I would ask is, how can a sales or marketing leader increase their impact and value, market value? Because to me, that's the key. So I actually there's 3 things that for me stand out that I've been talking about for a while now to the sales and marketing leaders in my network. So number 1 is joining a community, which sounds so simple, but honestly, we don't do it as sales and marketing leaders. If you're a business owner, you almost by default, find yourself joining communities out of desperation. But I'll tell you, having been a sales leader for organizations, I worked just as hard as the sales leader, if not harder sometimes, than the CEOs I was working with. And they had Vistage groups. They had all of these things, and I had nothing. It was because I was working all the time. So I'd say the number 1 thing is join a community of top performers. There are actually lots of communities out there, depending on what where you're at in your career. Invest your own money, which is a hard one. If you do not invest money in joining communities or coaching programs, there's a massive difference. Your mind and heart go where your money is. So I would say invest money and join programs. The CEOs that you're working with, if you're a sales leader or marketing leader, they're doing it. Trust me, they're investing tons of thousands of dollars in themselves. I would also say a small business owner, this applies to, because you're probably leading your sales and marketing team. The second thing would be reach out to top experts. This is something, some of it's fear, like people not wanting to reach out and bother people, like, oh, they're unreachable, untouchable. But that radically changed my life. I wish I would have done it earlier. I didn't do it until I'd started my consulting firm. I was probably about 3 years in almost. And I started reaching out to people who were professional experts who seemed like they were out of reach, out of touch. And some of them got back to me and took calls with me and became coaches and mentors, and still are to this day. And without them, I'm telling you right now for a fact, I wouldn't be here. So get on LinkedIn, find the people who you're like, that's where I want to be, and start reaching out to them. And again, invest your time and your money, because they are important and they're busy, and their time is probably more valuable than yours if you're reaching out to them. And so make it worth their time by being attentive, working around their schedules, and potentially hiring them as a coach if that's something they're willing to do or offer. And then the last thing would be leveraging these relationships. This last one really builds on the other two. Leverage relationships that you develop with leaders or other organizations of your business owner to gain access to the same resources they have. So small business owners or sales and marketing leaders of smaller organizations. So really, if you're under $100 million in revenue, it's very difficult to compete in the marketplace to have the impact that you want to have as a leader in an organization. You need to be competitive by leveraging resources. And so partnering with other organizations or having, experts that are mentors, coaches, whatever, that has been a powerful tool that I've used to be able to get here. To this day, there's resources that we have that we still could not afford, even at our scale, that we have access to because we've developed amazing relationships with these people. And so, talent, technology, education resources, things like that. So I'll leave it there. Those to me are the three things. It's really join a community, reach out to top experts, and then leverage those relationships to get access to the resources that they have.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And before we part, I would just love to add to that too. That's something I learned as well. So to two of your points, I joined a mastermind group last year for myself, and it was a big deal and it was a big investment for me to do that. But absolutely, night and day difference, just because I think if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. Right. And so
that's right.
Being able to rub shoulders with people that elevate you and not just help you stay plateau or stagnant, I think that's a huge thing. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Where is it that people can find you if they're interested in getting in contact with you?
Yeah, best place is marambaconsulting.com. So that's my consulting firm that I've been operating and running for about 6.5 years now. You can reach out. You'll probably get a hold of one of my team members. If you want to get a hold of me directly, Joshua at marambaconsulting.com is the best way to do it. That is my direct email. You'll get in contact with me.
Cool. Awesome, man. Thank you so much again for joining us. This was really awesome. So, and we'll put your information in the show notes, you guys. So go find Josh's information there if you'd like. And for those of you listening, thank you again for joining us on the Unscripted Success podcast. If you're interested in submitting a question to the show, be sure to go to the show notes, because you can get a question answered, not just by me, but by another expert like Josh here. And I would love it if you guys did that, because we love answering questions from the community. And that way I also don't have to go find questions for myself. So please do that if you would love to submit a question. And we look forward to hearing from another expert on our next episode and catching you guys on the next episode. Thank you.